Hello and welcome to Pensions in 10 with me, David Brooks, and my colleague Simon Kew. This week we take a look at state pension overpayments, actions on pension scam with the regulator, and kerfuffles within LGPS contribution rates.
Dave, we often touch on scams and what's happening in the world of pensions on this podcast. And this week we've got something with the regulator, with some friends of theirs, and a case of nominative determinism in action. What have we found?
Yes. Now, should we deal with the nominative determinism first or at the end? What do you want to do?
Oh, should we get that out of the way? Let's
get out of the way, yes. So the head of, well, let's get the gentleman's job title right. Let me quickly. Yeah, so he's the Pension Scams Action Group lead.
He is.
Paul Sweeney. I don't think we can both hum the theme tune to the Sweeney at the same time. Not sure that comes across. But yes, they've called in the flying squad. I keep wanting to call it the special branch. Is that something from Python? Anyway, I don't know. So they've announced some improvements to their intelligence gathering process within the Pension Scams Action Group, PSAG, involving embedding people within the City of London Police and the National Economic Crime Centre. So, as you all know, scams are constantly evolving. So actually having people in these places will, I'm sure, be helpful to understand what's going on, what the trends are, and being able to stop these scams from proliferating as they go through. People get targeted. And this is on the back of sort of the campaign a few weeks ago, but I think it's just before Christmas and over Christmas, the EastEnders storyline, which was put into that soap opera to raise awareness, which is great too. I don't know what else the regulator's got planned in talking about pension scams, but I would like to see a little bit more on what happens to people when they're punished for being a scammer. We see a lot, and we've talked about it on here in the last few weeks around the Pensions Ombudsman's dishonesty units. And they do a great deal of good work trying to get people back in the right place. So reclaiming funds from directors of trustee companies that have been scamming people. But I'd like to see a bit more from the regulator on this and how they can use their powers, their moral hazard powers, to protect people, to put people in prison. Basically, I don't think the dishonesty unit, the ombudsman, has that power. They can only do sort of civil sort of punishments of getting the money back. I'd like to see a bit more on that to actually deter people from becoming scammers in the first place, or even raise awareness amongst scammers that, what you're doing is a scam. One of the cases that came up a long time ago involving a chess grandmaster has not come back through the ombudsman yet. But in that case, the individual was claiming that they weren't aware this was a scam and pleading a little bit of ignorance around how pension schemes work, and that's to be heard by the ombudsman. But if we can raise awareness that something that smells a bit fishy probably is a bit fishy and is actually against the law, and if you do it, you will get put into prison for a decent amount of time, is something that may deter the scammers from happening in the first place. Who knows? But that could be an interesting thing to think of next for the regulator.
Yeah, I'd also like to see a little bit more around what they're doing with bad actors in the UK and, of course, offshore, because it doesn't have to be a UK-based scam. It could be from anywhere in the world, sending texts. I mean, I'm sure you've had them, Dave. I certainly have. I'm sure our viewer and listener have received dodgy texts saying, "Hi, Dad, it's me. I've got a new phone," or "This is HMRC. You need to pay us back this tax that you owe us." All of these are scams, right? And as you said, if it smells fishy, it's probably fishy. If you get a text out of the blue, then it's a very, very unlikely that it's going to be genuine. So I think it's great to see that they're doing more. PSAG, of course, not to be confused with PSAG, which is Pension Scams Industries Group, which is Margaret Snowden and co, who do phenomenal work as well. The more we educate people about this, the better. We've spoken as well about the double hit. You get scammed out of your pension, and then because you've accessed it, you then get a tax bill from revenue. That needs to be addressed as well. That's not fair, and I know that's something that PSIG have been looking at. So there's an awful lot around this. There's so many moving parts. Unfortunately, the scammers don't play by the rules, so they're generally ahead of the game. And as soon as there's a new little loophole or a new bit of technology, they'll use it to try and get pensions money out of people's hands. So really, all we could say, viewer, listener, make sure that you, your relatives, family, friends are all alive to the fact that if they get a message from someone they're not expecting, asking for money or asking to log into a website or to respond to a text. Simply don't do it. And then share it, not share as in post it to someone else, actually show them on the screen, get a second opinion before you react to it. But hey, good news that more is being done on scams.
Okay, Simon, so state pension benefits are in the headlines again this weekend for different reasons. Can you explain to us what those reasons are?
I can, Dave. It's not a very pleasant one. Bereaved relatives of a person that has died in receipt of state pension. The government has made overpayments in a number of cases. In the last year, £144 million was overpaid. They then write to the families effectively saying, give us the money back, which isn't particularly pleasant for them at all when they're going through the loss of a member of their family. It isn't mandatory though, which is quite interesting. I'm not sure I was aware of this previously. It's a voluntary request effectively from DWP saying, would you be nice enough to give the money back? Now, of that 144 million, the Department of Work and Pensions recovered 67.3 million pounds from people that were doing the right thing voluntarily. So that meant there was 76.7 million unrecovered from those bereaved families. So it's another one of these cases where the timing's horrendous. I get why the timing is there. I get why the trigger is there. But it's one of the last things you really need when you're going through bereavement, to receive a letter saying, give us back hundreds, thousands of pounds, whatever it may be. I just, it doesn't sit nicely with me, Dave.
Well, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, we have it in occupational pension world where schemes are sometimes under an obligation to recover monies that have been overpaid in the event of a death, and sometimes there's a delay in telling the administrator, and likewise I'm sure there's a delay sometimes in either the government being told or the government agencies coordinating, because there is a sort of there's a service where you inform one body and they tell everybody else all the different benefits and things you might be getting paid to make sure they cease. But yeah, so occupational schemes have an obligation to recover some monies, and sometimes schemes will have a de minimis, so it's because the administration cost will be there of reclaiming it. So perhaps this is a bit of an overhang. This sort of voluntary thing is a bit of an overhang to the past, where perhaps the government thought, well, we'll just won't bother over reclaiming too often. We'll have it in a statutory footing because of the cost to reclaim is too much. You know, if the government had it as an obligation to reclaim, they might end up spending a long time chasing after people aggressively, and that would be unpleasant. And so the sort of voluntary basis might be a bit of a sort of a compromise. Although then it's a bit of a lottery. You know, as an individual, if you don't really feel like you should pay it back, then don't. But just because someone does the right thing and doesn't appreciate that it's voluntary, because it doesn't tell you anywhere in the letters that it is. So it's a little bit naughty of the government not to say to people, actually, you don't have to pay us this money back. And so those that perhaps fearful of the government coming after them with interest and penalties and everything else pay it back, and those that are more brazen or perhaps more confident or more aware might say, well, no, we'll let them chase us again or something. So one answer could be to put it onto statutory footing that, you know, overpayments beyond a certain level will be reclaimed. But I don't know. It's a really tricky one, I think, for the government to do without looking like they're being uncaring, as you say, in a moment of or a time of bereavement. So, Simon, our final story is an interesting look into some ongoings within the Kensington Chelsea local government pension scheme. Do you want to fill us in with what you've been reading?
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. Thank you. In summary, the council applied to the investment committee to cut their rate to zero, so their contribution rate to zero for the 25-26 year. And from what we can see, it looks as though that has been improved by the investment committee, but the actuary said that they would not be able to certify that. They actually wanted, originally it was supposed to be 15% for 25-26 and 7.5% in the previous 2 years. The actuary said that they would be happy to come down to 7.5%, but would not certify if we came down to zero employer contributions. Now, the scheme is currently funded, so we're told, to 207%. So it's not as though the scheme isn't well funded, and it's local government, so it's not as though the employer's going anywhere. So Yeah, it's one of those. Is it reckless prudence, or is it sensible that you carry on with employer contribution rates at a level? The actuary made the point that if we go down to zero, then it could be that that's expected, that we'll continue to do that in future. It set a dangerous precedent. Now we should say to our viewer and listener, we haven't seen the legal advice. So we've got the papers, the discussion papers from the meeting. There was advice from council, which was in one of the appendices, and we don't have any of the appendices, so we can't see what the legal advice was on that. It's believed that the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government and the Pensions Regulator would both become involved in an investigation if the employer contribution rate were set to 0%. So that's something that they may be mindful of. But the overall headline that we have is that the Investment Committee have approved the zero rate. So we don't know whether that's been implemented yet. I mean, again, we're talking at a point in the future rather than now, or indeed whether it will be, or whether they're going to pause and go with the actuary's recommendation. We're seeing differing views coming from this, but I don't recall something as high profile as this, where you have effectively a local government saying to the scheme, can we have a zero contribution rate? It being put to the investment committee, the investment committee agreeing with it, but that going clearly against the actuary's advice. So I find it fascinating, and I really hope at some point we'll see whether they do go with a 0% rating for employer contributions, or the 7.5 recommended by the actuary. Well, Dave, as somebody once said, time flies like an arrow and fruit flies like a banana. So we have come to the end of another Pensions in 10. Thank you to our viewer and listener for viewing and listening. It's been wonderful to have you with us. Have a great week, keep pensioning, and we'll see you at the next Pensions in 10.